We're going to spend the next few minutes discussing the Student Learning Objective, or the SLO, or sometimes I call it the SLO. And this is a required component of your teaching job when you get hired in a public school district. So every year, every teacher has to do a Student Learning Objective. So we're going to spend the next few slides talking about what that means, and then we'll go into each component and how that's going to look for our EDEX 454 class. So first, what is the SLO? And I got a lot of this information directly from the State Department. Some of the slides are exactly the same because I wanted us all to be on the same page. So according to the State Department, the SLO is a vehicle for collecting and analyzing student growth based on growth targets. And so essentially this is just progress monitoring, which I think as special ed teachers, we do this all the time, and we must do it for IEPs. The SLO is actually for every teacher in a public school, so even gen ed teachers will be doing this. And typically, the SLO would be, for us, a whole year. So what can the students do in August? What would we expect them to do in May? And when we would be monitoring our growth targets throughout that entire year. You'll also complete an SLO in this class, which will be, obviously, for just a small portion of a semester would be your target time frame. You'll also do an SLO in internship, which would only be about 10 days of growth because you only teach 10 full days in internship. So we're trying to get you prepared to do the real thing when you are an actual teacher in a school district. That will be a much longer time frame, probably a whole year. Our students who are our teachers who teach secondary, like English 101, maybe their classes are semester-based, so maybe they do only collect data per semester because the students may only be with them August to December, for example. So according to the State Department, the SLO promotes collaboration. It promotes, and this is the big one, data-driven instruction. So everything we do now has to be based on data, and we have to prove that we're providing evidence-based instruction and intervention, and standards-based, for our gen ed friends, instruction to our students. So this is just another way for us to monitor data. There are two types of SLOs. You're probably always going to do the individual SLO, and that's the one formed by the teacher. You're going to do that for this course. You also do the individual SLO for internship, and I bet you, because you're special ed teachers, you're also going to be doing individual SLOs for your job too. So there's two different approaches to SLOs. This one, again, is probably going to be more straightforward because you're special ed teachers, but you can have class or course SLOs, and a class is where you might teach 5 periods, and one of those periods you're going to actually monitor progress in. So maybe it's just your literacy class, your writing class if you teach elementary school. Maybe middle school, if you're a gen ed teacher and you teach social studies, maybe you're just going to do 7th period. And so typically you're probably going to do class if you're going to do resource or self-contained. A course would be, like I teach 9th grade English 101, and I'm going to evaluate every section of that. So maybe I teach 5 sections of that. So it would be more course-based. And then the whole point of an SLO is to have growth targets. And so we're going to focus on 2 different types of growth targets. I'm sorry you can't see the top of my screen, but it says approaches to growth targets. This is probably the one you're going to do if you teach like resource. This is the tiered approach, and this is where you actually put the students in tiers based on historical and trend data. So you might have students who are advanced, who you might be assuming that they're going to perform at a higher level than everybody else, or maybe at a faster pace than everybody else. And so you might put students in tiered. So these tiers would be the kids who might be more advanced, they need enrichment, they might need acceleration. My tier 2 would be my students who are just proficient. They're getting what they need, we're making progress, but they're not considered high or low. This would probably be the majority of my students if I'm doing a tiered approach. Tier 3 would be my students who are working below grade level. These are the ones who might not be working at the same pace as everybody else. So the whole point of the SLO is that not everybody gets the same growth target in your class or in your course, but that they get what they need. So I could have students in Tier 1 whose growth target's a lot higher than those in Tier 3. And so that's probably what you're going to do if you teach resource. You might also do the individualized growth target. So this is what I think a lot of our self-contained friends will probably do, but this is based on each individual kid. And so what is student A expected to do versus student C and B? So each individual student would have their own growth target from August to May or June. For this course, EDEX 454, you're just going to work with one student, and you're going to do it in the area of math, obviously, because our course is about math. When you get to internship, you'll have to do it with a minimum of 6 students. You'll actually do it with a whole class. And if you teach elementary, you're going to be doing reading, writing, or math. So I think this assignment being in this course is going to be really helpful for you as you move through internship. So you're going to work with one student in the area of math. Okay, so these are all the different parts of the SLO. And it looks daunting right now, but I promise you a lot of it is very basic and scripted almost, and I'll show you some examples along the way. So the first part of the SLO, and this is directly from the State Department website, is the student population. So you're going to provide a description of who's in your class, in your practicum. Information should include, but it's not limited to, the number of students, a description of students with exceptionalities, a description of academic supports, and any other kind of classroom supports they may need. This is the example the State Department provides of how to answer this section. So you're seeing, please see that you're not writing a book here. This is very almost prescriptive. I'm answering each question in this description piece by piece. And so 30 students are in the class, 12 boys and 13 girls. 2 have IEPs, 2 are gifted, 2 are ELLs. It's just it's very simple. And what I want you to do is to review each part of the rubric that we have. So this is the rubric that the School of Education uses to evaluate your SLOs. And you must, by the time you leave internship, you must get a 2 in every category to pass the assignment. So what I want you to do is for student population, I want you to first start here and say bullet 1 identifies the number of students in class. So my bullet would say there are 18 students in my self-contained special education mild to moderate class. Bullet 2, I would probably say there are 13 students with a learning disability, 4 have an intellectual disability, and so on. Bullet 3, there are 7 boys and however many girls. The race, the lunch status, the family status, learning styles. I would mention that they all have an IEP. Common interest in any kind of academic support. So this is the bare minimum that you have to do. Of course, if you want exceeding expectations, you can add on to your bullets here. And here's the last component for student population. So 2 examples of student information that was collected, and then you're citing research to show how the student information examples are relevant. So I've been telling people to do like student learning profiles here, like what are their learning styles, and that matters according to research, or it often matters according to research. So for this student population, I just want you to bullet, and I want you to bullet in order of the rubric. Okay? So this will be based on your practicum students. If you want to do this on one student, which I highly encourage you to, I would still put the number of students in the class, but just note that you're only going to be working with one student during the SLO. Class environment, the same thing is going to happen. Expectations for behavior, transitions, how are they monitored, and describing techniques. I just want you to bullet this information. And here's the rubric for that. So please stop and look at this. and I'll post the actual PowerPoint on Blackboard for you so that you can actually look at each part of this more specifically. Historical and trend data. So this is often confused with like our classroom assessments. This is not a classroom assessment. These are like our benchmark tests. So like our MAP testing, our any kind of like reading assessment that we do like 3, maybe 4 times a year. So these data you'll probably have fall, winter, and spring data on. Those would be our benchmarks. So you can see the example from the State Department. I cross-referenced the 30 student baseline scores with their grade 8 MAP science, end of course exams, and grade 8 ELA and math data to make certain initial results mirrored past performance. Results of those assessments are attached in a separate spreadsheet. So for your SLO, I want you to look at the benchmarks provided by your practicum teacher and figure out, like put me a little chart in there that said what the student could do in fall, what could the student do in winter, because then hopefully you're going to be able to kind of predict, okay, well this is the trend the student is doing for math. And you can actually include reading in here because I think that's an important part, is that we're just not focusing on one part of a student's progress. So if you have to do math scores, but I would also encourage you to do reading. And again, I would just go through this rubric and bullet it based on the 2 and the 3. Our baseline data. So this is actually where you're going to develop a pre-assessment. You're going to give that pre-assessment to students, and then you're going to teach the students for a few weeks, and then you're going to give them a post-assessment. So your pre-assessment will probably be some kind of math probe. And so I'll talk about that more in the module, about what that probably should look like. But you'll identify the math probe that you're using based on developmental levels of your student. If it is a probe, like a math fact probe, and the student can get it right by chance, I would probably give them 3 baseline probes, all within the same math facts, right? I mean, not the exact same probe every time, but similar math facts. Give it to them 3 times. That way you know that they're not just mastering a math fact by chance. And then you're going to just explain those baseline data in this section. So and this is directly from the State Department. So this is the assessment checklist. And again, I would just use a probe in this instance, and I would give it 3 times. And I will link the probes on our Blackboard site. Then again, you're going to bullet this information. Then you're going to teach the student for a few weeks based on the skills and the gaps that you found in the pre-assessment. So if I know that the student always missed the 5s facts, then that's probably where my instruction is going to be. And then after I give instruction and I feel really good that the students are ready, I'm going to give a similar post-assessment related to the same facts that I gave at the pre. I'll do that. If it's a probe again, I'm going to do it 3 times because I want to measure to make sure it's not by chance. This is how progress monitoring is how you're monitoring progress during your instruction. So we care very much about pre and post, but we also care about that formative feedback that you're giving to students and how you're kind of assessing them throughout your instruction. You're going to develop a learning goal based on the pre-assessment. So I would target those gaps that you found in the pre-assessment and do a learning goal. And you're going to identify standards that go with that learning goal. So math standards are going to probably be really important for you. We link them in the first module of the first week. And then you're going to identify growth targets. So what do you expect your student to be able to do from pre to post? So are you expecting the student will get 5 more math facts correct, or whatever it may be? So you'll explain all of those in this section. And then you'll figure out whether the student actually did it or not. Were they successful? You'll also identify instructional strategies for the student based on the gaps. Okay, so the whole point is progress monitoring and identifying growth targets but also making sure that the growth targets are related to the gap.